when you're an academic, a tenured faculty at university, you're on these committees making decisions about, who gets hired and, who gets admitted to a conference. And I was just in a number of those over 2020 where I felt that people were being discriminated against, and most particularly it was Asian people and men. I didn't think that was the intent of these programs. So I sort of tried to say, look, I agree that diversity is important, but let's not make it a quota system where we're discriminating against certain people because of their immutable characteristics. And that turned out to be a very controversial thing to say.
So Dorian, would you just tell us a little bit of your background?
I'm a professor of geophysics at the University of Chicago. I usually work on the kind of mathematical side of geophysics. So I work a lot with applied mathematicians and mathematicians about developing algorithms that we can use to improve numerical simulation of things of interest. In my case, that tends to be things like hurricanes and the climate of planets outside the solar system. Those are the sorts of things that I'm interested in. And so I was invited to give what's called the Carlson Lecture at MIT. It was going to be exclusively about the climate of other planets, in particular planets that could be Earth-like and could have liquid water on their surfaces. Part of this is sort of a week-long visit where you sort of work on collaborations with the faculty and students at MIT. And then I was going to give an internal department seminar just for scientists about the probability that Mercury's orbit becomes unstable so that it smashes into another planet or the sun, which is a low probability, but part of the stuff that I work on is how to efficiently calculate low probabilities. And so that's why it's interesting.
Why is it so difficult to find atmospheres and sort of the things that we think would reflect, would be similar to what Earth's atmosphere is around other planets? I mean, there must be planets out there. We're starting to detect more exoplanets all the time, no?
This is sort of like an is-ought question, but I think a lot of people hope we will find planets that have liquid water and could potentially host life on them. But we don't know that yet scientifically. We now know that there are a lot of planets out there. The ones that we have measurements of their atmosphere are more like Jupiter and a few more like Neptune. And so they're much easier to measure their atmospheres. It turns out that there's a lot of Jupiter-like planets that are squished next to their star, maybe 100 times closer than Mercury is. So they're really, really close orbits. And those ones are really easy to detect and to measure their atmospheres. But for planets like Earth, we actually haven't measured their atmospheres yet. The project here was to try to make some predictions of what the atmosphere would operate like that you could test with the Future Space Telescope, in particular, the James Webb Space Telescope, which is supposed to be launched soon.
Yeah, and this new telescope, what will it do for us versus what we have now to what it will be able to do in terms of looking at detecting these planets and knowing what's going on the planets?
Well, so the most interesting thing that it can do, so it looks in the infrared, it looks at heat, and so it has to be super cooled so that you don't have waste heat or heat from the sun messing up the measurements. And it's going to be really effective for looking at planets that are orbiting small stars, which we call M stars. And it turns out there's 10 times as many of those as big stars like the sun. And planets that are orbiting those stars that could be like Earth, the small stars are less luminous, so you have to pack the planet really close to the star in order to give it hot temperatures like on Earth and not have it be frozen over. And when you do that, the planet ends up getting tidally influenced, and so it can get locked so that it does one rotation per orbit, just like the moon does. That's why we always see one side of the moon. So imagine a planet like Earth where it's always noon at the same point. Whatever time of day it is, it's always that time of day. It's always night on half the planet. And so those are the planets that we'll be able to investigate with this James Webb Space Telescope. And we want to know if an Earth like that could potentially still have liquid water, or if, for example, all the water would go to the night side and freeze out, or even the whole atmosphere would go to the night side and freeze out.
How far from the Earth does this new telescope need to be? Because if it isn't far from the Earth, it'll get, we'll feel a lot of heat from the atmosphere here, yeah?
It's not going to be in the atmosphere. It'll be in space, so it won't feel any heat from the atmosphere. But in terms of heat from the sun, it has a special shield for that. And then it has all sorts of cryogenic features to keep it cool.
So I think you had written a paper, you were being honored, right? You were about to go. And so then what happened?
I've also expressed currently unpopular opinions on campus, mostly concerning compelled speech around diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, affirmative action programs that are associated with quotas rather than just increasing applicants. And as a result of that, a small group of students and former students at MIT organized a campaign to have my lecture canceled.
Where did you write about that, or how did anybody know that you had these opinions?
Well, I started saying them in the fall of 2020 in my department. And then I wrote an op-ed in Newsweek last summer with my colleague Ivan Marinovich, where we expressed that. So
before you even got to MIT, did this come out and did, when was the first moment you knew that this was going to be, a controversial opinion?
So in the fall of 2020, I expressed those opinions in my department, and it led to a controversy. So I knew that those were controversial opinions. I actually didn't really know before that. I was sort of self-censoring for about 5 years and kind of just staying away from conversations on any of these kind of topics. I didn't realize kind of how controversial it had gotten because, I just focused on my science. I'm not paying attention to a lot of this stuff. Things got a little extreme, and I felt like I was in these, when you're an academic, a tenured faculty at university, you're on these committees making decisions about, who gets hired and, who gets admitted to a conference. And I was just in a number of those over 2020 where I felt that people were being discriminated against, and most particularly was Asian people and men. And so I didn't think that was the intent of these programs. So I sort of tried to say, look, I agree that diversity is important, but let's not make it a quota system where we're discriminating against certain people because of their immutable characteristics. And that turned out to be a very controversial thing to say. And after I found out that was controversial, my response was to want to explain the position more fully with Yvonne in Newsweek.
No, you must have known Yvonne earlier, yeah?
No, I met Yvonne as a result of this. So he had started a classical liberalism seminar at Stanford, which it's a Zoom seminar that is roughly once a week, and it has faculty from all over the country only by invitation. The nice thing about this is it's completely open. It's a limited group, it's about 50, and everyone knows they can trust everyone else. So you can really talk about anything. And so I had met him through that. He invited me to attend that seminar series.
He had seen the controversy somewhere and said, hey, why don't you come to my
yeah,
lecture?
Not to give a talk, but just to come to this group and participate in the discussions. I mean, usually I make a comment only once a month or less, but I enjoy watching them.
So diversity of thought do you think that's important? You're saying certain people were left out of the conversation, you said earlier, right?
That was one of the points I originally made. That didn't get into the Newsweek article, but
I mean, how do you think about having a net where these different ideas, and do you think is that important when we're trying to, from a scientific perspective, from any perspective, do we need diversity of thought to, kind of challenge us, critical thinking, and all of those things that we need to move the world forward and to move science forward?
Yeah, so to move science forward, you really shouldn't need diversity of thought. We should just need people who all agree on the scientific principles, that we're going to be objective, we're going to use universal methods, we're going to be disinterested, we're not going to be doing this for our own gain, we're going to be doing this for the gain of knowledge. In other fields, diversity of thought is obviously more important, in the law, in history, things like this. The issue is it's less diversity of thought that it's an explicit goal in the sciences. It's just that what's happening right now is people with diversity of thought are being excluded. And so there are mechanisms being put in place that say, if you believe that we should treat every person as an individual equally, then they have parts of the application statements that are graded with the rubric that say a person with that belief shouldn't be evaluated as part of this, for this position.
As you start to make these points and you're getting ready to do the op-ed in Newsweek, are you sensing what you're going to say is going to be controversial, or do you just feel like, well, look, let's get this voice out there in a differing point of view and see what people say? What's your intention when you put that?
One thing we should mention here, the word controversial has picked up a negative connotation. I would challenge that. I think part of the point of being a professor is to, challenge people in ways that may sometimes be interpreted as controversial. But yes, by last summer, I had, even though I'm a little bit of a dense nerd, I had picked up on the fact that this was going to be controversial. Yvonne and I discussed that. Our feeling was it was important for young people in the field to see that not everyone agrees with this. And it was also important for the public just to at least be aware of what we had been observing. That's why we decided to write that article.
When you did this, you're not, ultimately we're talking about it in a controversial way, but really what you're saying is just that everybody should have an opportunity irrespective of their, background. Is that basically what we're sort of talking about?
Yeah, that's my goal. Everyone should, have an equal opportunity, I would say.
If we are always saying, well, all that matters is skin tone or some other issue, then we're not making our departments as strong as they could be, that kind of idea?
Yeah, I think that's a corollary. We should back up for a second. So I'm going to read to you something from the Shills report at the University of Chicago, which outlines the three major functions of universities in the modern world. Number one, the discovery of important new knowledge. Number two, the communication of that knowledge to students and the cultivation in them of the understanding and skills which enable them to engage in the further pursuit of knowledge. And three, the training of students for entry into professions which require for their practice a systematic body of specialized knowledge. And that's mostly referring to law school and med school. So the primary objective of a modern university is the production of new knowledge. And the secondary objective is training students in particular so that they can continue the production of new knowledge. And so it's important to have the telos, or the ultimate goal, in mind when you're talking about implementing strategies for achieving it. And if you start substituting alternative telos or joint telos, joint goals, then you will be less effective at achieving that main goal.
Do you remember the call you got when you were going to get to go give this lecture? Because it's an incredibly prestigious thing. Do you remember that feeling of what that was like, just getting the call that you were going to be able to go do it?
Yeah, so the people involved are Carrie Emanuel and Dan Rothman, who are really amazing scientists at MIT. They're the ones who invited me. And it's a big honor to be able to work with people like that and to get to go interact with them. So I was very excited about that.
And so as the day grows closer, do you start to sense that there's going to be opposition?
Well, it all happened at once because they announced it internally. And then that started this whole thing on Twitter. And so it was sort of a sudden, it wasn't like a creeping sense. It all happened all in one go.
What happened right away? Like, what was the time frame? So you were invited and then you were uninvited?
Well, I was invited. Okay, so originally I was invited in the summer of 2020. It got canceled because of COVID in the fall of 2020. I was re-invited officially in the summer of 2021. And then late September, they announced it and people got mad on Twitter. I mean, some people, it's not like the whole, it's important to realize this isn't the whole department. It's not like everybody's to blame. It was this relatively small group got mad on Twitter. Someone pointed this out to me, a few students, and my reaction was like, oh, MIT is not going to care what some people are writing on Twitter. But then a week later, the department chair called me and I thought he was going to say, oh, there's some silliness on Twitter and, we apologize. People have been saying mean things. But a big important part of academic freedom is that you never uninvite someone that you've invited to give a lecture because it bothers someone else, because that's the heckler's veto and that's going to shut down the free exchange of ideas. So we're not going to allow that to happen. And we've explained to everyone that we have the following penalties for disrupting a seminar. And, we'll all try to be civil with each other, even though we disagree on this issue. But instead, it was sort of like, oh, well, we decided to cancel a lecture because of this controversy. We don't want it to distract.
I have to say, it struck me when you wrote about this, though, I think you were very intentionally said, please do not attack the people that were attacking me.
Yeah,
and I thought that was really important. Talk about that, because I think that's really important.
There were a few faculty involved in this, but it was mostly students, grad students and some postdocs. So it's kind of like, hopefully they're learning, maybe this is part of their learning experience, learning that this isn't the good way to interact with other people. And so, but I certainly don't want them to be attacked. The other thing is, I've learned, I started on Twitter a year ago, and I've learned that it can be not so nice place sometimes. And so I knew that people would say some mean things.
When we say the free exchange of ideas at a academic institution, what are we really saying? And what does it mean when we start to take out certain voices because we don't agree with them?
Well, it means you no longer have the free exchange of ideas in a basic sense. We have to maintain epistemic humility, the idea that we don't know everything from the beginning. And so it's possible that that guy who's saying something that you really disagree with, or that you find immoral, or that makes you really angry, is right. And it's also possible that you'll learn something to improve your perspective, even if that other guy's wrong. And so that's just a super important thing to maintain on a university campus. Of all the places, I mean, that's sort of like, that's the place where that is supposed to be maintained in our culture. You know, there are other contexts where you wouldn't need to do that, but the point of the university is to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And we can't do that if we just shut down anyone we disagree with and don't even let them state their opinion or make their argument.
You know, we had Susan Azell on earlier this year. She's the CEO of the Penn Center about, you know, to protect journalism and freedom of speech. And she did talk about the university as that sacred place that you're talking about, where we have to be able to debate ideas and figure out how we are going to relate and debate with people that we don't agree with. And so I would even say, for the idea that you're talking about around, you know, fairness and equity and all that, is there a place to have a really rigorous conversation so that we can get to a better understanding of what is fair and equitable when it comes to, you know, education and children and getting them into, you know, a kind of a better system? Like, how do we protect, I guess my question, that kind of freedom of speech within the university setting?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing with how we do that is we start with the policies of the university. So at the University of Chicago, we have something called the Chicago Principles, which basically says our faculty and students can say what they want, write what they want, give lectures on what they want, and they can invite whoever they want. And we're never going to stop that because someone disagrees with it or is offended. If something bothers you, it's your job to make a rational argument opposing it, or to invite a speaker with an opposing opinion. So that's a short summary of the Chicago Principles. We also have something called the Calvin Report. And what the Calvin Report does is it says the university as a corporate body will never take a position on an important social and political issue. And the reason that's important is that we don't want to have an orthodoxy that's enforced by the administrators who you know, sign people's checks, schedule classes, give out degrees, because that would discourage anyone who disagrees with it from fully exercising their academic freedom. So that's step one, is to have the policy framework in place. And step two is to have administrators who really buy in to that vision. Our former president, who's now our chancellor, Bob Zimmer, has been a huge defender of academic freedom. And when I had a little bit of controversy in the fall of 2020, he issued a statement saying, it didn't mention me by name, but it said basically, look, we don't punish faculty for saying what they think about stuff. And that the whole controversy just died down. That was it. Whereas at MIT, the administrators there, they were pressured a little bit and they just sort of folded. And so you can see from that contrast how important it is that you have not only the policies in place, but also the administration willing to, you know, stand up for them.
You know, in physics, you have some universal principles. You know, that's why we can understand neutrinos coming out of the sun and what that might mean for us, and how you can make these predictions about life or other systems that are happening on other planets. You know, has this you know, in the social sciences, that's what this is, our microscope is Twitter. Have you found anything interesting about this process and how it's gone?
The interesting thing is that things get very politicized. When you're playing a truth game, you go in and hopefully if you're wrong, you adjust what your thinking is. But you know, I'm not an expert on politics. It's not something I paid a whole lot of attention to, but it seems from what I've watched so far, when you're playing the politics game, you do a different thing. You go in and you say, what does my side think? And then you determine what you think is true based on what your side thinks, which
right,
and a little frustrating.
So we're at this moment in time. I guess we're always at an inflection point. Every moment in time is an inflection point. Where do you think that this is headed? You know,
Well,
Now, are we going to the dark ages, or are we going to some utopian society?
I am inclined to think that this stuff will sort itself out, that enough people are going to push back, but it does require people to actually be willing to stand up and take the abuse.
You have to be brave to have your own, to put your point of view out there, right? Particularly on Twitter. So I have two questions. One, how do you kind of handle that sort of emotionally? It sounds like you got support. Well, you got the Princeton invited you, so you were able to do something on Zoom. I think a lot of people showed up, but being willing to sort of, at this point, it's about going out of the safety of the university where we would hope you could have conversation where we're disagreeing with each other, and then going out into the public writ large and having those conversations. And so how do you handle that? Are you still willing to have those conversations out in the public?
Have you read Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher?
Sure.
I have.
Yeah. So what Epictetus says is, if someone, says something bad about you or that you feel is bad, like suppose someone says you're fat, or, let's just go with that example.
Although he probably wasn't using that particular one, but yeah.
What you should do is look at yourself rationally and unemotionally and say, am I fat? And if you are, then thank the person for pointing that out to you. And if you're not, then why would you listen to someone who says false things anyways? And so I think that's the sort of attitude to practice. In terms of the Twitter stuff, what I would say is just don't read the comments people write. If, put out your message. And if someone wants to say something mean, that's their prerogative.
Now, do you think you'll ever get back to Boston and give this speech, or give a different speech in a different time? You think you'll return there?
Well, so the Carlson lecture, this big thing that I ended up giving the lecture at Princeton, that there's been no invitation forthcoming to do that. However, Carrie Emanuel and Dan Rothman, the ones who invited me to give the Carlson lecture, they were able to get the department chair to approve me to come to give my Mercury lecture about the probability of Mercury crashing into other planets. And so I'm planning to do that in the spring.
The irony of that, you know what I mean?
Well, I think one thing that I'm thinking as we have to wrap up now is, there's so much around this that we're not going to solve, today, but what gets lost if you don't get to kind of put your idea, your scientific, rigorous scientific ideas out into the world, and what are we losing when and I think that's something we all need to think about, right? Because you may be giving us information that could affect so many things moving forward that really are about the state of our universe, our Earth and our universe and climate. And those are things that I think a lot of people do care about. So there may be an unknowing consequence, or, an unintended consequence to what happens when we kind of shut down conversation.
I agree. That's a very good way to put it.
Thank you so much for coming on here, Dorian. This is a total pleasure, and appreciate you being here.
Great. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you, Dorian.